talk about the very last depreciation method, which is called double declining. Double declining is also known as an accelerated method because the depreciation expense from the early parts are very high. And what they normally tend to do is they get smaller and smaller as the years go. So the depreciation expense is accelerated in the upfront stages of the life of the asset, but then as it proceeds through the life, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. Okay? And so in terms of depreciation, we're going to have to figure out how to utilize a table for double declining. But for double declining, you have a couple of steps, okay? So double declining, your first step, you're going to calculate your depreciable rate. Calculate your depreciable rate. Okay? Now, how do you calculate your depreciable rate? Your depreciable rate is 1 divided into the number of years. 1 divided into the number of years that the asset has. That's how you calculate your depreciable rate. Step 2 would be to double the depreciable rate. Double the depreciable rate. Okay? And so, in terms for us to calculate this rate, we have to follow these 2 steps accordingly. All right? And so for this particular problem, we're going to calculate the depreciable rate by taking 1 divided the number of years, which happens to be, God bless me, excuse me, happens to be 5. So that's going to give us a rate of 0.2, right? 20%. And then what we're going to do from there, we're going to double that. So we have 20% times 2. That gives us 40%. 40% is going to be the actual rate in which we're going to depreciate this asset. So if you really think about it, we're taking a big chunk of this asset every year. We're taking 40% of this asset every year, the asset's book value, every year when we depreciate it. Okay? And so let's set the table up. So your table starts off with a book value. Then you have the rate. Then you have the depreciation expense. And you have accumulated depreciation. So this is your table. And of course you have the years, right? So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay? And so at the beginning of year 1, what's going to be your book value? Remember, book value formula is cost minus accumulated depreciation, but at the beginning of year 1, what's your book value? It should be $200,000. Why is it $200,000? Because we haven't depreciated it yet. This is the beginning of year 1. And we know our rate is 40% because we've already calculated that. So let's go ahead and put that down there for all of the particular parts. We're going to take that $200,000 and multiply it times 40%. I'll get my calculator out to calculate the first year's depreciation. So 200,000 times 40% gives us 80,000. So 80,000 is the depreciation expense. Accumulated depreciation is 80,000 as well for the first year. And so we go back to book value. Remember your book value formula, class students tend to forget that you keep going back to the original cost. Original cost is 200,000 minus accumulated depreciation, which we just finished calculating, of 80,000. And so that's going to give us 120, right? $120,000 for the beginning of year 2. Okay? Now we're going to take that 120 and we're going to multiply it times 40%. And it's going to give us $48,000 for year 2, depreciation expense. Okay? And once we have that once we have that 48,000, we can also calculate our accumulated depreciation for year 2. How are we going to find out our accumulated depreciation for year 2? Add up both of your depreciation expenses, right? All thus far. You could either add up all your depreciation expenses thus far, or you could take the previous accumulated depreciation and add the depreciation expense. Either way. So it's going to give us, what is that? Plus 80,000. That's 48,000 plus 80,000. 128,000. And then we go back to our book value at the beginning of year 3. Costs, always go back to your cost, 200,000. Minus accumulated depreciation, 128,000. That gives you $72,000. Okay? We're going to take $72,000 multiplied times 40%. And we're going to get 28,800. We're going to get 28,800. How are we going to find out accumulated depreciation for the following year? Again, we could add up all 3 of our depreciation expenses, but I like to just take my last period accumulated depreciation and add my current period depreciation expense. It's just a little quicker. So I'll take the 128 plus the 28,800. And that gives me 156,800. 156,800. So then we go back and we take our costs again for book value of year 4 beginning and subtract 156,800. So 200,000 minus 156,800. That's going to give us 43,200. We're going to take 43,200 and multiply it times 40%. And that's going to give us 17,280. Okay? Our book value, we'll take the 17,280 and add it to the previous accumulated depreciation. And it's going to give us 174,008. Now, guys, I want you all to stop and pay close attention. Okay? Stop and pay close attention because this method gets tricky. Now, everything mechanically we have done correct. Everything mechanically we have done correct. Nothing's technically wrong with the mechanics in this calculation. However, we have to make an adjustment. And why do we have to make an adjustment? It revolves around our accumulated depreciation in year 4. Something is wrong with this number. This 174,080. Something is definitely wrong with that. What's wrong with that? Think about it. So basically what we're saying is at the end of year 4, we've depreciated this asset by $174,080. Something is wrong with that. What's wrong with that? If you remember carefully, if you go back to our original input, we had a cost of $200,000 with a residual value of $40,000. And basically that residual value said at the end of the years, at the end of the 5 years of this asset, it's going to still be worth what? $40,000. That also means that if we're going to have a value of $40,000 at the end of 5 years, the most we could depreciate this asset is its depreciable cost of what? $160,000. We already understand that because I've noted that like several times. So $160,000 is the most we could depreciate this asset, which means our accumulated depreciation should never exceed $160,000. That's impossible because we need it to still be worth $40,000. But at the end of year 4, our particular accumulated depreciation has totaled $174,080. Well above, well higher, well past the 160. We see that. And that's wrong. Even though the calculations are correct, That's wrong. So basically, we went too high in depreciation this asset in year 4. And the most we could depreciate this asset in year 4 is what, class? The most we could depreciate this asset in year 4 is what? $160,000. Okay? Which means that this depreciation expense is too high. And the reason it's too high is because the rate is too high. Right? And so we got to do some logic now. We know that the most we can depreciate this asset is $160 at the end of year 4. But we know that the most that we depreciated the asset the previous year was $156.8. So how much can we really depreciate this asset? Well, just subtract the two numbers. The most we could do is $160. But we know the previous year, the most we depreciated was $156.8. So if I take $160 and I subtract it from $156.8, I will get $32,000. That's the most that I could depreciate this asset. $3,200, I'm sorry. $3,200. That's the most I could depreciate this asset. How do I do it? By keeping a close eye on my accumulated depreciation. When you do this method, you have to make sure that your accumulated depreciation never exceeds your depreciable cost. This should never exceed the $160. When it does, you have to make a manual adjustment, what I've just did. So this year, I'm only going to depreciate the asset for $3,200. What's the rate? We really don't need it for the test. It's not a big concern, but I can do it by just doing simple algebra, right? This divided in this will tell me the rate. So if I took 3,200 and I divided it into 43,200, I would get roughly 7%, 0.74%. So that's your rate, really, 0.074. That's your rate. But again, you don't really need that, but I just put it there. Okay? And so what happens in year 5, our book value, cost minus accumulated depreciation, should be what? $40,000. Okay, but that's the beginning of year 5. Will we depreciate this in year 5 at all? No, we won't. We won't depreciate it at all. Why? Because we've already reached its salvage value. And so I've seen situations in this where you stop at year 3, depending on the numbers. So you have to be careful with this. Watch this video a couple of times so you can feel confident in what you're doing.